Subcommittee will come to order, and I want to thank everyone for attending this afternoon's hearing on the Globalization of Research and Development and Innovation, Part 4, Implications for the Science and Engineering Workforce. This is the final hearing in a series that the Science and Technology Committee launched in June to learn more about how the trend toward moving research and development jobs and facilities overseas is affecting our nation's economy and competitiveness. So far this year, we've heard from economists, university presidents, industry representatives, and scholars who've presented a variety of interesting and sometimes contentious views about the topic of globalization of R&D. Next month, the committee staff will release a report summarizing the committee's findings and providing us with some ideas for next steps to address the challenges our witnesses have presented. Today's hearing focuses on the impact of globalization on the American science and engineering workforce. This can sometimes be a heated issue. No one wants to think about losing their job, and today's science and engineering graduates face an uncertain future. I'm sure everyone here today will agree that we must find a way to help our current and future science and engineering workers better understand the challenges and opportunities facing them in the 21st century. They want to know which jobs will stay in the United States, which are likely to move overseas, and what types of new opportunities will be created through globalization. Having to adjust to realities in the labor market is nothing new. The information age has made the workforce more efficient overall, but also rendered any number of jobs obsolete through automation or consolidation or the possibility of moving it a far, far distance offshore. Today, some science and engineering jobs are moving offshore, and workers here in the United States need to adjust or have assistance in that adjustment. Sometimes that means finding a new field or new company. Other times, it simply means learning new skills to remain qualified for those positions that stay in the United States. The problem is that many workers are often surprised by changing job availability, whether those workers are experienced professionals approaching retirement or students contemplating a science or engineering career. That unpredictability hampers decision-making at the individual worker level and at the government level. Our witnesses today will help answer some of these questions about the scope of offshoring, which workers offshoring is most likely to affect, and how current science and engineering workers are responding to the challenges and opportunities of globalization. I'm glad that we have a representative of industry with us today to help us understand the business perspective on these workforce issues. Businesses today often are not simply employers. They provide education and training and influence the types of education that tomorrow's innovative scientists and engineers receive at our universities today. I'm hoping to learn more about the types of skills that industry will expect the next generation of workers to have so that we can make policy decisions that make students more competitive in a global economy. The United States science and engineering workforce is the best in the world. Today's hearing will help us better understand how to match workers' skills and abilities with employers' needs, thereby ensuring that it remains that way for years to come. And with that, I would like to recognize my friend and colleague, Dr. Gingrich, for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu, and I want to first thank you indeed for holding this fourth hearing on the issue of offshoring that will address the implications for the science and engineering workforce. It's well documented that the United States has a very extensive history of scientific innovation that has benefited engineers and scientists as well as our nation's economy. Over the years, engineers and scientists have developed products and technologies that have raised the standard of living in our nation. In return, engineers and scientists have been rewarded for their efforts with abundant employment opportunities, excellent salaries, and a quality of life and substantial public respect, I might add. The advent of globalization is, in part, jeopardizing this mutually beneficial relationship. A 2003 McKinsey Global Institute report estimates that 52% of engineering jobs are amenable to offshoring. This, along with the 2003 spike in unemployment among engineers and computer scientists, have led to feelings of widespread anxiety in these professions. For example, electrical engineers have become so concerned about their careers that a 2006 IEEE survey showed only 30% of the engineers responded that prospects for long-term demand for engineers in the United States were excellent. Only 13%. And 18% responded that the prospects were poor. What's even more alarming, Mr. Chairman, is the same survey showed that only 37%, let me repeat, only 37% of these engineers would recommend engineering as a profession to their children. And a staggering 35% would not recommend engineering at all. Now, as a physician of 31 years, I can't say I enthusiastically encourage my 4 children to enter the practice and profession of medicine. I didn't discourage them, but I didn't encourage them either. And by the way, none of them followed in my footsteps. And, while there's certainly some disillusionment among today's engineers and scientists on the prospects of the innovation industry in the United States, our country has also had the benefit for the past several years of foreign companies insourcing jobs here in the United States. This phenomenon occurs when a foreign-based company establishes a subsidiary here in our country that provide jobs for hard-working American citizens, good jobs. Mr. Chairman, in a 15-year window from 1987 to 2002, jobs created as a result of insourcing have jumped from 2.6 million to 5.4 million and continuing to increase. Insourcing has also provided an infusion in our economy by accounting for 20% of United States exports. In 2003 alone, foreign companies reinvested $38.6 billion in their American operations. That's a substantial number. United States subsidiaries also serve as an important component to domestic R&D activities. According to Dartmouth College President Matthew Slaughter, United States subsidiaries have spent $27.5 billion on domestic R&D, increasing its share of R&D activities to 14%. Mr. Chairman, in my own state of Georgia, foreign-owned subsidiaries provide more than 190,000 high-paying jobs to our residents of the great state of Georgia. They provide the livelihood for 5.7% of Georgia's private sector workforce. This is an increase of over 18% in just 5 years. Additionally, over one-third of the jobs the subsidiaries bring to Georgia are in the manufacturing sector. This is so important. I have a lot of textile and other manufacturing activities in the 11th of Georgia. Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs goes so far as to say, and this is a quote, "There is no other fundamental mover of economic development than science and technology." Chairman Wu, I could not agree more with that statement, and I'm proud of the progress that this committee has made through the American Competes Act to increase STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, for America's youth as a way to provide incentives for domestic companies to stay here, right here at home. And at the same time, though, we need to explore what can be done to bring more foreign-owned companies to our country to provide these high-paying jobs to the hard-working Americans. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing today's testimony from our esteemed panel on the solutions that they have that will enable us to maintain and grow an engineering scientific workforce that will indeed keep us the world leader in technology innovation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gingrey, and I can report to you that the grass is always greener. I was riding an elevator with a colleague in a law firm. This feels like decades ago now, but he said he wouldn't encourage any of his kids to become an attorney. And I thought, boy, that's kind of sad. As you may know, Dr. Gingrey, I was a failure at your profession. I went to 1 year of medical school, and then, as far as I know, I'm still on a leave of absence from that medical school, and then trained as an attorney. And given what the only thing that prevented me from switching from law school to medical school is that I'd been there before. So the grass always is greener, and I suppose that...
Mr. Chairman, when you said the grass is greener, I thought sure you were referring to Oregon versus Georgia. You guys are getting all the rain these days. But what you didn't know is I actually took the LSAT, and I scored really high on it. And I thought about going to law school just for maybe 30 seconds.
Well, we're in storytelling time now, and I took the LSATs purely to prepare for the MCATs, and little did I know that I was actually going to use the score someday. So life is uncertain, which I think is the theme of this hearing. Life is uncertain, and preparation for the future is very, very important, and I think that is what many of our witnesses will address. And I would like to introduce our witnesses today. First, Dr. Michael S. Teitelbaum, who is Vice President of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Dr. Charles McMillion, who is President and Chief Economist of MBG Information Services. Dr. Harold Salzman is Senior Research Associate at the Urban Institute. Mr. Paul Kostek is Vice President for Career Activities at the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And Mr. Henry Becker is President of Qimonda North America. As our witnesses know, please try to keep your oral testimony to 5 minutes, and your written testimony will be entered fully into the record. And before we start with Dr. Teitelbaum, let me say that I think we are about to be interrupted by a series of floor votes, which may take 30 minutes or so. And let me apologize to the panel and the attendees, but these interruptions just can't be helped, and let me apologize in advance. When votes are called, we will pause we'll pause at that point. And resume as quickly as possible. And with that, Dr. Teitelbaum, please begin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Gingrey, members of the committee staff, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for inviting me to appear before you. It's nice to be back on the Hill, and your comment, Mr. Chairman, about roll call votes is very reminiscent of my experience for 2 years on the Hill as staff director of the House Select Committee on Population. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, but real. I should start by saying that my testimony is my own professional opinions, not necessarily the opinions of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. So you should understand these are my personal evaluations of the questions that your staff have posed to the panel. Given the short time available for oral testimony, I'm going to limit myself to 5 points. There's a good deal more in the written testimony you've received. First, and I'm going to have to be declarative and uncomplicated in making these 5 points. These are all very complicated issues, and they each deserve 5 minutes or more, but I can't do that. My first point is that it's only fair to say up front that we actually do not know how much of U.S. origin R&D has been globalized so far, much less do we know how this will change in the future. The offshoring of these services is itself quite new, and it's very difficult to measure. The quantitative data we have are remarkably weak, and even worse in a way, they lag well behind what seems to be a rapidly changing scene. U.S.-based companies that, at least according to press reports, are energetically offshoring their R&D investments to countries such as China and India seem to be very cautious about talking publicly about what they are doing. Now, most observers believe that the globalization of R&D is increasing, and increasing fairly rapidly, but again, we don't have good quantitative data on this. And the trend is attributed to numerous incentives, including some obvious ones: lower remuneration rates for scientists and engineers, heavy marketing of offshoring services by international consulting firms, the desire of U.S.-based firms to tailor product development to non-U.S. markets, U.S. tax provisions. That's something the Congress does actually have some leverage on, that allegedly perversely favor offshore investment of accrued profits. Attractive capital and other subsidies offered by overseas governments for R&D, and even mandates to locate R&D operations imposed by governments of some major countries such as China. And then there's federal support of both U.S.-trained foreign students and temporary work visas that facilitate offshore outsourcing of R&D and other high-skill services. These are all plausible, but we can't really dissect them and tell you, well, 0.34 of the trend is due to this one and 0.27 to that. As is always the case, we know even less about the future than about the present and the recent past. So will the apparent rapid growth of R&D offshoring continue or even accelerate? We don't know. Will firms decide that payoffs they had anticipated were overstated, or that the risks they had planned for were underestimated? To what extent might R&D funding originating outside the U.S. provide career opportunities for U.S. scientists and engineers? We don't have answers to that. They're critically important topics for this committee, and I sincerely hope that you will pay a lot of attention to them over the coming years. My second point is that although I know that you are routinely told by corporate lobbyists that their R&D is being globalized, in part due to shortages of scientists and engineers, or it will be if they continue to experience such shortages, no one who has studied this matter with an open mind has been able to find any objective data showing such general shortages of scientists and engineers. And here I include many academic researchers, as well as several studies by the RAND Corporation and other think tanks commissioned by federal funders. That's point 2. You have a vote. Point 3, the best evidence is that large fractions of U.S. college freshmen continue to be interested in pursuing majors in science and engineering. However, more than 1/2 of these change their minds once they begin their degrees and move towards other studies and careers. Fourth, we need to face that there is a serious disconnect between labor market demand for science professionals and the way federal funding is used to subsidize graduate science education and postdoctoral positions. This disconnect means...
I'm sorry, Dr. Teitelbaum,
Yes.
but we had an old system of bells, which I found charming. These new horns are terribly offensive, and I lost your last sentence,
Okay.
which I think
I'll say it again.
Thank you.
We need to face that there is a serious disconnect between labor market demand for science professionals, I'm not speaking now about engineers, and the way federal funding is used to subsidize graduate science education and postdoctoral positions. This disconnect between demand and supply means that we are subsidizing substantially more science PhDs, in my judgment, PhD students, and postdocs than can find attractive real job openings and future careers in these fields. Our current model works roughly like this. If you vote in this committee and elsewhere in the Congress to substantially increase federal funding for basic research, one side effect not intended by you is substantial growth in the number of slots for PhD students and postdocs supported by the additional research funding you voted. Yet this increased research funding does not result in commensurate increases in career pathways for scientists once they finish their postdocs. So this is a recipe for self-defeating instability, for enthusiastic booms followed by depressing busts. Some of the most rapid growth in the federally subsidized science workforce has been in the category postdoc. If the truth be told, only a very small percentage of the current postdoc pool seems to have realistic prospects of gaining the regular academic positions that they aspire to. Does this mean that I believe it was unwise for this committee and the Congress to authorize increased federal support for K-12 science and math teaching or for basic research in the physical sciences? To the contrary, my own view is that K-12 success in science and mathematics has become as important for both economic success and an educated citizenry as were basic reading and writing skills in the 19th and 20th centuries. And for basic research, my view is that such research produces valuable public goods that contribute powerfully to human welfare. Most corporate leaders say openly they cannot invest very much in basic research because it's difficult to capture the profits from it, and this alone makes basic research a very appropriate role for government. This leads me to my fifth and final point. We need much more thoughtful attention to how the current federal funding system for graduate education might be gradually adjusted to better connect it to the labor market demands for science professionals. There's strikingly little federal support for such analyses, and some small funding could go a long way to improve our understanding. Now, I'm going to skip over this because of time and say one important adjustment would be to find practical ways to improve the fit between graduate science education and employment paths for science professionals outside academia. And with this goal in mind, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation has been investing millions of dollars of our money to assist U.S. universities in creating innovative professional science master's degrees, these PSM degrees they're known as. These are graduate level science degrees designed in consultation with employers who provide guidance to the faculty on both the scientific and the business skills they consider critical for their new hires. They're designed to produce sophisticated science-trained professionals who are interested in non-academic careers in science and whose skills are of interest to non-academic employers, both corporate and governmental. There are now over 100 such degree programs offered by over 50 universities in 25 states. And there's a website I cite in my testimony that will give you a lot more information on it. I just want to close by saying, Mr. Chairman, that I was pleased to see that in the America Competes Act, the Congress provided the first authorization of federal funds to support these professional science masters initiatives via the National Science Foundation. And of course, I understand, having been here for 2 years, that these authorized funds still need to be appropriated. Still, it is my hope that the National Science Foundation right now is actively planning how to move forward energetically in building this and other promising graduate pathways that will improve the fit of U.S. graduate science education to the needs of the U.S. economy. That's really all I can discuss in the short time available. I am ready to respond to members' questions to the best of my ability, and I'll be happy to provide you any further information subsequently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Teitelbaum. And Dr. McMillion, if you stay close to the 5 minutes of oral testimony, although we very much enjoyed Dr. Teitelbaum's 10-minute testimony, we will have time for your testimony, at which point we'll have to take a break to go vote on the floor. And please proceed.
For inviting me here today. I need to tell you I'm from Texas, and so I speak very slowly, so 5 minutes goes quickly for me, but I'll do my best. You've heard about challenges from the ample supply of STEM workers, and you'll hear more on the supply issue. I will focus on three key challenges likely to weaken demand for STEM workers. The rich U.S. marketplace, this is the first of my 3 points. The rich U.S. marketplace for goods and services that sustains the STEM workforce has been maintained for a generation by soaring levels of debt. Since 1981, the ratio of federal and household debt to GDP has rocketed, breaking the World War II record in 2002 and is now in uncharted territory. Over the last 7 years, federal and household debt combined increased by over $10 trillion, while GDP grew just over $4 trillion. Without this debt, there would be far fewer STEM jobs. No one knows how much longer this unprecedented borrowing can last, but is a major vulnerability for STEM workers and indeed for the U.S. economy. Second, massive U.S. losses in global trade have shifted our economy to activities that are non-globally traded, unraveling the technology supply chains that are essential to our STEM workforce and to our economy. For a generation, the U.S. has produced and earned far less than it spends, borrowing and importing to make up for the shortfall, piling up record future obligations. The U.S. has accumulated $4.3 trillion in current account trade deficits just in the last 7 years. Some economic theorists claim that importing what others can produce more cheaply allows a country to automatically concentrate on what it makes best, and the sales of this will pay for imports, raising living standards for all. It's a nice story. But massive U.S. trade deficits over almost 30 years, now including technology, show that the world has become a far more complex place. All manufacturing industries lost jobs since 2001. Most suffered trade deficits, producing less than we ourselves needed for the U.S. economy. This process is unraveling or hollowing out the once tightly integrated and dynamic U.S. production and innovation system. Indeed, the U.S. lost its traditional global surplus in advanced technology products in 2002, and that deficit is worsening by another 45% this year. Since 2003, the U.S.'s global earnings on intellectual property, royalties, and fees were not enough even to cover global payments for imported advanced tech products, much less for any of the non-ATP products, from autos to oil. In the past 7 years, of the 6.1 million total jobs created in the U.S., all are accounted for in less productive but globally protected public and private education and healthcare, and in food services and bars, some lawyers too. During this time, more productive manufacturing jobs lost 3.2 million jobs. Professional and technical firms did add some jobs, but most of these appear to be related to the debt-financed and globally protected boom in construction, education, health, and national security. You heard testimony in June claiming as a success story that the U.S. no longer makes television sets because the U.S. must constantly innovate and move on. This now generation-old emphasis only on the nimble portion of the production and innovation system has worked very well for some individuals and for some global firms, but overall it has failed STEM workers in the U.S. economy. Finally, thirdly, China and other competitors are modernizing and integrating their production and innovation systems, posing urgent new threats to the STEM workforce and to continued U.S. prosperity. China's former processing trade has rapidly transformed, integrating its modernizing industries into dynamic, efficient clusters. China's global trade surplus in manufacturing was only $31 billion in 2001, but it is near $400 billion this year. For example, in the massive and very important parts-dominated machinery and computer industry grouping, HS-84, China has rocketed from a $7 billion global deficit in 2001 to a surplus that will blow past $100 billion just this year. China's global current account surplus is over 13% of its GDP, and it's growing, and this GDP, of course, is growing at over 11% a year. The world's leading technology firms now need to be in China, and they must have good relations with China's tech-savvy and tech-hungry authorities. This need is not only because of very low production costs in China, but now also to be near their customers, the world's top producers of goods and services, and the world's most rapidly growing domestic markets. This gives China's authorities enormous new power to require key tech transfers, R&D facilities, massive training, and a lot more. The OECD reports that China already spends more in purchasing power on R&D than Japan, and if current trends continue for just 5 more years, more will be spent on R&D in China than in the United States. A UN survey finds China the overwhelming choice for new R&D facilities. Difficult economic times present fire sale opportunities to those with money to spend, and China now has unprecedented amounts of money in its fast-growing, now $1.5 trillion official reserves, and in its cash-rich firms fresh from wildly successful initial public offerings. This competition for the favor of China's authorities is ever more fierce, further weakening the demand for STEM workers in the United States. The STEM workforce and the U.S. economy face big challenges right now, not at some comfortably far-off point in the future. The U.S. cannot continue to rely on borrowing growth, channeling that growth to non-globally competing industries, and ignoring the rapid competitive emergence of China and others. I hope that Congress will urgently organize itself to develop the strong, comprehensive development strategy that the scale of this new challenge requires. Thank you very much, and I look forward to discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. McMillion. At this point, we will recess this hearing. There are 4 votes, so it will be a decent period of time before we reconvene. And again, my apologies to the panel and the attendees.
Did you work on the Hill too? I was here.
Here in the Science Committee, we sometimes do demonstrations of, is it general relativity or special relativity, where time stretches out. My apologies to the witnesses. Dr. Salzman, please proceed.
My analysis draws on research conducted with my colleagues and based on fieldwork at some 74 sites, 38 firms in the U.S., Europe, Asia, Latin America, and additional analysis of educational and workforce data. Just to presage our findings, are that first, firms and universities are globalizing due to changes in competitive strategies, and that innovation and knowledge are flowing across borders with few constraints. Second, that this globalization is not occurring because of a lack of U.S. STEM workforce supply or quality. And finally, that technology policies, we kind of refer to as techno-nationalist policies of the past, are not well suited for meeting these new kind of structural changes and challenges before us. So what do we observe about globalization of R&D? First, that firms are fundamentally restructuring their organization of innovation, engineering, and technology work by establishing centers of excellence around the globe. And these centers are, all at the top end, leading edge innovation. It's initially driven by cost, but it's since evolved into a much broader competitive strategy. And focusing on cost, I think, misses what's behind this competitive strategy as it's evolving for R&D. They want to locate innovation centers in growing markets, in emerging economies. They want to take advantage of labor there, both for cost and talent. And they're finding new types of innovation in those countries that is different from the types of innovation in U.S., Europe, other kinds of countries. So in IT, for example, Indian companies have pioneered a lot of systematic software development in order to do offshore work. So there's a necessity of crossing distance. As the technology becomes a mature technology, this process improvement becomes an important innovation in quality, security, reliability of software, and gives them an advantage very similar to what the Japanese brought to new levels of quality in auto design and manufacturing. Well, I think we know what the rest of the IT story is, which is that the United States has not captured any large share, if any at all, of the global growth in IT services. At the same time, the U.S. has maintained a stable workforce in IT, even without capturing a growing share of it, albeit with layoffs and adjustments. Other areas beyond IT are also developing in the emerging economies, often in U.S. firms, but often in their offshore sites. And I think the trajectory is, a likely trajectory is the same as that has happened in there. So what we find is that the institutional structure is vastly different than it was just a decade ago. Firms are globalized, U.S. human capital and universities, and the U.S. workforce is internationalized, and there's innovation advantages in offshore locations. These transformations mean that jobs that today look like they'll stay in the U.S. because they require face-to-face interaction may not actually stay here in the near future. We visited firms that are doing KPO, knowledge process outsourcing of legal services, financial analysis, and other areas. And just remarkable the things that they're looking at to see how they can decompose it, change it, routinize it, so they can take most service work and conduct a large portion of it offshore. So based on these findings, I conclude that very few jobs are inherently not in competition with jobs offshore. Within a decade, offshore science and engineering capabilities will rival those in the United States in many areas. Perhaps not the breadth of innovation and not the depth of technology in certain areas, but certainly there will be strong innovation centers in many areas offshore, both in U.S. and non-U.S. firms. Thus, we cannot assume the historical advantages of the U.S. will keep STEM jobs here indefinitely. Further, a strategy built on the assumption that U.S. will have an exclusive hold on any particular type of work or occupation is an error. The approach of producing more scientists or engineers, at least those in the traditional disciplines, would seem to be misdirected. So, then the part that answers the question of are we producing enough in the right times and whether STEM jobs are attractive is perhaps the more important question. The data, I think as Michael Teitelbaum reviewed, suggests that we're providing a more than adequate supply of college and postgraduate scientists and engineers. We estimate it's something in the order of 2 to 3 times the number of job openings. This doesn't mean that there's an excess of supply, but just the pool is adequate to draw from if there were a shortage, which we don't find much evidence of. Whatever the numbers about career openings and the prospects of the future, find that engineers and managers we've interviewed have a widespread perception that career prospects in those fields are rather dim. And I think, let me point out, few engineers or managers say they'd counsel their sons, daughters, nieces, nephews to go into engineering. They've had a great ride, but the ride's over in their view. And, I think while that's disheartening to hear, what is even more disturbing in some of our interviews is exemplified by an engineering professor who told me that he would counsel an American student not to go to graduate school in engineering because of the poor career prospects. He said, for a foreign student, it's a better career than their other options. For an American who had the ability to get into a graduate engineering program, he or she would have much better options elsewhere. So, even within, it sounds like counseling is that there are not a lot of great opportunities. It's not true in all fields. There are some that are still very promising. So from what I can tell, there does not seem to be any real evidence of shortages. There are hiring difficulties. We have the person looking for a Java programmer with 10 years Java experience. Well, Java's been around 12 years. Unlikely to find that. I'm not sure that's a shortage. Or the company president who's quoted as saying there was a shortage, it was so bad he had to start hiring people with just average skills. And I think we'd all like to hire at the top end of the distribution, but it's probably not a realistic way to base policy. So to conclude, say that the fundamental problem facing the U.S. is that the institutional structure of knowledge and innovation development have changed. Firms and universities are now globalized, as are knowledge and human capital flows. The goal of sequestering innovation, knowledge, or skills within national borders can no longer be achieved, whether desirable or not. In the past, GM's progress returned a benefit to the United States. Today, it's less clear whether the U.S. or at least the workforce benefits more from GM or Toyota. So in the future, home country advantage of firms will diminish further when the vast bulk of profit and market are outside of the U.S. And these strategies built on thinking that we have borders that can contain it, or built on trying to increase workforce supply, and the idea of holding it here, just unworkable, and suggest alternative policy strategies and models are needed to capture value in the new global system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salzman. Mr. Kostek.
Thank you, and thanks to Mr. Wu and to Mr. Gingrey for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. I'm here actually probably as the odd person on this panel, since I'm a working engineer by day and a volunteer for the IEEE-USA, serving as the Vice President for Career Activities. In that role over almost 30 years, I've had the opportunity to communicate with engineers, computer scientists in a wide variety of roles around the country. Historically, the engineering profession has been one that has dealt with a cyclical pattern where there's been booms and busts of opportunities. If you lived in my hometown in Seattle in 1972, there was a very famous billboard that said, "The last person out of Seattle, please turn out the lights," as the Boeing company had a massive downturn. In the 90s, we also saw a period of high unemployment as the U.S. went through a transition after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the peace dividend kicked in and resulted in defense cuts and a big transition taking place for engineers going from the defense industry to new industries. And of course, we also saw just a few years ago the dot-com implosion that had a dramatic impact on engineering and computer scientists, forcing people from their jobs. Historically, though, people have had the perspective that things would return to normal, that the marketplace would return and things would be better. And of course, now with the emergence of India, China, we're seeing a very different marketplace where the competition for engineering, the competition for talent, isn't just here in the U.S., and that jobs that go away may not return in the future. So our members are now going through the challenge of trying to redefine themselves and identify what skills they need to compete. The most frequent question I'm asked is, what skills do I need to get that won't be outsourced? And frequently most people are very disappointed when I tell them there is no guarantee of any skill I can tell you that can't be outsourced. And the expectation has to be that you have to constantly be assessing the marketplace, understanding what changes are taking place, how that's going to impact how you work. For some of our members, that's become almost essentially they've given up. People will tell you that they have given up on engineering and given up on computer science careers, that they've just felt that they've hit a certain age, and going back to school to try again for a few years just isn't worth it for them. So in a lot of senses, when we look at the question of the supply and demand of STEM talent, especially engineering talent, frequently I think the question that isn't always addressed is the question of utilization of the talent we do have in this country right now. There's a lot of emphasis placed on increasing the demand of increasing the numbers of people who go into science and math and university level, but we don't do a lot of looking at what happens to the million-plus electrical engineers, for example, who are in the marketplace today. How do we utilize their skills? How do we help these people to reskill themselves, potentially even relocate themselves to the places where opportunities are? So those are the types of things that we're concerned about. as people move forward with their careers, and as we have these discussions on STEM and development, not just looking at where's the future coming from, but we also have a future pool of people that are present today who range from their 20s, 30s, 40s into their 60s. I mean, with the constant dialogue that goes on today about retirement age moving up, we'll have a resource of people that we can use much longer if we're careful and if we keep them properly trained and utilized. And I think that's going to be one of the key elements that we as an organization look at as we meet with our partner organizations, as we talk to companies and industry, is the question of how do we properly utilize the people there today. I think what you'll find frequently when you talk to some of the engineers who talk about giving up, they feel like they've been forgotten, left behind in terms of the changes that have taken place in the marketplace, in terms of just even the perception of whether some gray hairs mean someone can compete in the technical marketplace as sufficiently as somebody else who's much younger. So I guess I'd leave you with the challenges that we see going forward isn't just the question of developing a STEM workforce for the future, but it's also utilizing the current workforce. Because I believe if the current workforce begins to fade away, feel there's no opportunities, that will also have a big impact on our abilities to attract the future generation. As any parent would advise their child, look at the career path. And unlike those few people who do get lucky with stock options at a Microsoft or a Google, the majority of engineers are not getting to a point where they can happily retire at 35 or 40, but are looking for careers that move them through their 50s and into their 60s. So with that, I'll close and again ask you all to consider those things as you look at the question of engineering in the future, that it's also utilizing the current workforce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kostek. Mr. Becker, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Wu. Ranking Member Gingrey. It's a pleasure to be here. My background and experience spanned 23 years within the semiconductor industry in total. I don't have any studies to cite. My testimony is empirical in nature and based on those 23 years. First, I'd like to start with a little bit of background on Qimonda. We're a global semiconductor company that designs, manufactures, and sells memory products, specifically DRAMs, dynamic random access memories, for use in your computers, your laptops, gaming consoles, networks, large array of consumer and mobile applications. We employ about 13,000 people worldwide, and last year we had revenue of about $4.9 billion. Since 1996, we've invested more than $3 billion in our manufacturing site near Richmond, Virginia, that houses 2 state-of-the-art advanced production lines for wafer processing. We also have 2 design centers in the United States, one in Burlington, Vermont, one in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we also have sales, marketing, and support organizations throughout the United States. We employed some 3,000 people focused heavily on science and math backgrounds, focused towards engineering degrees for those 3,000 positions. Our chips are used by companies like Cisco, Dell, HP, IBM, Microsoft, Motorola, just to name a few. Today, 40% of our revenue comes out of the U.S. And so our investment in manufacturing and design has grown significantly over the past 10 years. More importantly, some of our industry key enablers call the U.S. home. Intel and AMD for computing chipsets for the computers and laptops, NVIDIA for graphics and gaming applications, Apple and Motorola for wireless and handheld applications, as well as some of the largest server users such as Google that my colleague just mentioned. Finally, the U.S. is home to JEDEC, where the industry debates and adopts standards for global standards for the marketplace. We selected Virginia for our manufacturing base partly because the state and local government's strong commitment to partner with us to develop a skilled workforce, one tailored to our needs in manufacturing of semiconductors. We're proud to say that over the past 12 years, semiconductors went from being non-existent in that state to the #1 export today. Qimonda is a global company. Our headquarters are in Germany. We're traded on the New York Stock Exchange solely, and my boss, the CEO, is of Malaysian descent. We design, manufacture, and ship chips around the world to support the changing supply chains that our customers have and to gain access to skilled workers. We do not have a geographic division of labor by worker roles. As you can see by the chart behind me, we've got manufacturing and R&D operations basically around the world. Manufacturing on 3 continents, R&D on 3 continents, for those specific reasons. That said, most competitiveness and talent availability are issues for our manufacturing design operations in the United States. Our primary competitors are located in Asia, where labor rates are significantly lower and the education and skills are constantly on the rise. Additionally, we face critical shortage of workers with adequate science and math skills. The United States is just not producing enough skilled workers to support the semiconductor industry. Many of our new hires come from other semiconductor companies where they've been trained, or they come through visa programs from other companies, or other countries. We would hire more immigrants if there were more visas available. However, more visas are not the permanent answer. It is our strong preference to see a larger pool of skilled U.S. workers. In the meantime, we have developed homegrown programs, like many companies, to meet the needs of our skilled workforce demands. As an example, in Virginia's Henrico County, just outside of Richmond, Qimonda, Virginia Commonwealth University, and the Henrico County Public School District have partnered together to create an education opportunity that we call the High Tech Academy. It's a 2-year science and technology study program in the public school for juniors and seniors. At the end of the process, they gain 32 credit hours that are fully transferable to any university in science and math. They're able to internship at Qimonda, and all the while they're being exposed to career opportunities in the science and technology, not specifically for semiconductors, as they go through that educational experience. But our efforts are not enough unless the U.S. actively develops more homegrown engineering talent. It is just a matter of time until development, high-tech manufacturing, and design work shifts from our country. It seems to us that producing more qualified U.S. engineering and science graduates is a better medium and long-term solution to the skill shortage we face than just increasing the number of visas to maintain the skilled data pool. The United States is competing with countries that offer significant incentives to attract both manufacturing of high-tech and design and development of new products. And they've also adopted strategic plans to increase their pool of skilled workforces. Most of these nations treat technology in general and semiconductors specifically on the level of the national strategic interest, and as such have embraced it in the full extent they can, sometimes beyond World Trade Organization norms. We've seen some of this directly, not only in the area of building skilled labor pools, but also in the direct subsidies to companies. The need for stronger enforcement of those non-competitive behaviors is something that we see as a threat to the U.S. technical worker as well. The United States needs a fundamental investment in science and math, one that encourages ongoing education. One such program out there is FIRST Robotics. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but FIRST meaning for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. We're a strong supporter of that and believer in that approach. Students in high school build robots and are introduced to a world where science and technology are celebrated, not put off to the side as, just the geeks do that, but it becomes mainstream. And if you've ever been to a competition, or if you haven't, I would encourage you to, because the level of enthusiasm is right up there with any sporting event you've ever been to. Students begin dreaming and becoming science and technology heroes, and you're able to plant that seed and maybe grab onto that spark in their life. We need to find additional methods to attract the most talented students into engineering and technology professions to produce a workforce that keeps manufacturing and design here in the U.S. Thank you for the opportunity to offer my testimony, and I look forward to answering any and all your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Becker. And at this point, we'll open for our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Several of the witnesses, both before the break and afterwards, referred to mandatory technology transfer, that other countries sometimes require as a condition of doing business in that country or selling products in that country that there be a certain amount of technology transfer. And I think I'm just going to start my questions with the most incendiary suggestion first, and that is, why don't we respond to these mandatory requirements with a federal statute forbidding U.S. companies from complying with mandatory transfer? And I'm throwing this out for thought purposes, not to actually prohibit technology transfer, but to give our companies leverage in their negotiations. There's a model for this. For a long time, Arab countries have had it in not an embargo, but what is that? Boycott. That's right. There was a boycott of Israel, and I believe that it is against American law to comply with that boycott. And many organizations find workarounds where they can have activities in both Israel and in other places. The anti-boycott statutes basically encourage folks to kind of move in the right direction, and an anti-mandatory tech transfer statute might give American companies the opportunity to say, boy, I sure would like to do that, but I've got this federal law, U.S. federal law, that I've got to comply with, so let's talk about what we can do on a voluntary basis so it doesn't have to be mandatory, so that we can comply. And that would at least change the rate of tech transfer, and that's where I'm going to go with my questions later on about rate. And what would you all think about the workability of an anti-mandatory tech transfer law?
Mr. Chairman, we have some laws that restrict the transfer of technology. In fact, it's one of the things right now that Intel is relying on to limit the transfer of technology to their new Dalian $2.5 billion. So the tech transfer laws that we have now, I think, do serve a very useful purpose. I think that additional laws, additional restrictions would be extremely helpful, and as you indicate, not necessarily because they would actually, in all cases or many cases, restrict the technology, but that they would give the company the ability to have a little bit more leverage than they have now. And if I could say also that one of the things, just suggest a way to think about these issues, is that for many years, multinational firms were able to play multinational firms were able to play countries against one another for good reasons and bad. They were able to move around resources to where they could be most efficiently utilized. There were very good things, there are very good things about multinational companies, and for many years they have done that. China poses, I think for the first time in my experience, an example of a country which has now created such dynamism that it is playing companies against one another, and it's playing all of the major companies. In Intel's case, it's ADM and Intel in particular, but really all the semiconductor players. In automobiles, all of the major players. In the auto sector, there is an actual explicit requirement to locate R&D facilities in China in order to produce in these joint ventures, by the way, in which foreign companies are limited to a minority share. So when you read about General Motors or Toyota or Ford or whatever producing in China, they are all minority partners of those operations, but they're required to move R&D facilities to China, and more restrictions, I think, would be very helpful for these companies.
Well, to get to that rate issue, and I think I want to announce that it will be the policy of the chair to have a soft gavel on time limitations here. I just want to move to that rate issue because I think several of you have referred to nimbleness and the quickness of adjustment. And one of my observations, anecdotally, is that sometimes our organizations, our companies, can move much more quickly than individuals can retool. That is, either an organization doesn't survive and a new organization is founded in a new business line, or an organization changes with business needs and retools. But that an individual has frequently invested years and years of education and a professional career, and that it is tougher for the individual, say that it's hard to turn just for an example, turn a hardware person into a software person overnight. What can we do to help individual workers or individual researchers, catch up with the rate of change, this nimbleness challenge that new markets seem to impose on us?
I'll take a shot at that. Oh, please go ahead.
I was going to maybe comment on the previous question and figure out how to wheel that into your second question. The Taiwanese tried to slow down the export of their semiconductor business to China. They told the companies in Taiwan that you weren't allowed to build a 300 millimeter or a 12-inch factory until you built one in Taiwan. Well, all that did was force them to go find partners and accelerate their partnerships so that they could build one in China, because they were chasing a market, they were chasing a lower skilled labor rate and availability of engineers. I think my colleague, Mr. Kostek here, talked a little bit more about how do we reuse the resources that we have at hand. And I think we have to look very diligently for those people. I mean, are they on the market? Are they looking for jobs? I think that they have the right skill sets, not necessarily are they in the right place. Because innovation is innovation, and it takes creative thinking from my perspective. And somebody who's got experience brings with them the ability to take blinders off and answer questions from a different perspective. So I don't know that you have to go out there and retrain those people. I think you have to have managers that are willing and have the vision to be able to hire those people into those jobs and to mentor the younger engineers on how to solve those problems in a more creative way.
Dr. Teitelbaum?
Well, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to add, it's a different point really, something that we at the Sloan Foundation have invested a lot of money over the last 12, 14 years in encouraging is the availability of high-quality advanced education online to people who are working and can't really go back for a degree or a certificate, take 6 months or a year off. They need to earn an income, but they also need to keep their skills up to date in a rapidly changing set of science and technology sectors. I think the evidence is clear now that it's entirely possible, in fact, it's very popular with students to provide high-quality education online, not at fixed times so that people can do it when they're at home or traveling or sitting at an airport because the plane was delayed or whatever. These kinds of online education provisions have grown extremely rapidly. They're growing at about 20% per year among student populations in all fields, and I think it's something worth looking at seriously with respect to your nimbleness question, the nimbleness of the individual technical expert as compared to the nimbleness of the company.
Anybody else want to take a shot at this nimbleness issue?
I guess the only thing I would add, I think people have addressed most of it, is I think in most cases, first off, very few people are going to make the dramatic switch from a hardware person to a software person. Some will. Some will want to make a total transition. So in most cases, it's using resources that Dr. Teitelbaum just touched on, of saying, here's the skills I need to add to make myself employable. Then we need some level of flexibility from the employers to say, okay, here's somebody coming along who's picked up these new skills. They have not applied these skills yet, but their history tells us they are proficient engineers, so we should be utilizing these people to fill this position, even though they're not an exact match because they don't have the 10 years of Java experience, but they have a 20-year history doing programming and they just learned Java, so they should be able to apply. So in most cases, I think what we're looking at from both groups, employers and the engineers, is really flexibility on both sides, that people begin to communicate more effectively on what they're bringing to the table and what the expectations are of an employer in terms of filling a position.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gingrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Becker, I was particularly interested in your testimony in regard to your company, Qimonda. And I'm pleased, of course, to hear that a foreign-based company like yours are making investments in the United States, particularly in engineering fields, boosting, as you point out, domestic trade and the overall American economy. I think that's a very good thing. But, you know, earlier this summer, back in July, in fact, we were voting on the Farm Bill in the House. And the Democratic majority emphasized how important it was that we enhanced our food program, food stamp program, and other opportunities, and a lot of the spending, in fact, in the Farm Bill, increased spending, went to the food program. But unfortunately, in the pay-go rule, not a bad rule, but the pay-for, Mr. Becker, was, and I'm sure you're aware of this, $4 billion pay-for in new taxes on foreign-owned subsidiaries, like your company. And, of course, as you point out, you employ a lot of U.S. workers and good jobs. It might not have a grand effect on companies that are already located in the United States, that have established bricks and mortar and infrastructure, and, you know, now all of a sudden they've got this additional tax burden, but it would be more costly for them to pick up and move offshore, so they sort of bite the bullet and unfortunately have that burden. But my question is, my concern is, I'd like for you to address this, would not this be a tremendous disincentive for a company like your own that was thinking about establishing a subsidiary in the United States, and then all of a sudden, you know, this tax burden is there, and this, to me, it may very well be a disincentive. So, what do tax increases like this? What effect do they have on companies that we need? And I want to just add that in my district, the 11th of Georgia, Northwest Georgia, we have, I think, something like 272 companies like yours, and they create 23,000 jobs in the 11th District of Georgia. That's 9 counties. So we're not talking about small potatoes here. And in my opening remarks, I talked about the $5 billion, $5 billion, I think it was, as far as, but respond to that for me, if you will, please. And I would like, Mr. Chairman, since you have a soft gavel, that some of the other witnesses may want to respond to that as well.
In particular in the DRAM business, DRAMs are very much a commodity. The price that we get for a DRAM is strictly driven almost 100% by supply and demand. More supply, less demand, price goes down, and vice versa. Over the long haul, say the last 30 years, when we apply Moore's Law, if you've heard of Gordon Moore's Law from Intel, that talks about the doubling of a microprocessor's capability every 18 months, when we apply that to DRAMs, it translates into I have to produce a piece of memory or a bit of DRAM memory each and every year. I have to reduce the cost of that by 30%, 30. So any increase that I get hit with, whether it be a tax, whether it be cost of a consumable, whether it be my labor rate going up or whatever it is, my healthcare benefits, I've got to squeeze that out somewhere else, or I'm no longer competitive. So not only could it be potentially a disincentive to start there, it makes your job much tougher to stay there.
And I'm not surprised at all at that response. I would like the other witnesses. Teitelbaum, if the chairman is going to be generous with my time, maybe we can start with you and just go right down.
Well, Congressman, I don't have any great expertise in tax policy and tax law, so I don't know the details of the tax increase that you're describing. But generally speaking, if you raise taxes, you will have some effect in the market. I mean, that's the nature of economic behavior. I mentioned in my own testimony some of the other tax provisions that you might also want to think about, having to do with U.S.-based firms that have incentives not to bring their profitability, global profitability, and invest it in the U.S., but rather invest it abroad. This, if you combine it with some of the mandatory and other incentives offered by other governments for investing in R&D abroad, seems like a pretty good deal to me, a pretty good offer of, well, if you bring it back, invest it in R&D in the U.S., we're going to tax the profits. But if you invest it abroad, we won't tax them, and you'll get incentives, very substantial incentives from other governments.
Yeah. Well, this, in other words, a double hit, really, as you point out. Yeah. Dr. McMillion?
Certainly the DRAM business is a very low margin business, and so I can certainly sympathize with the effect of any tax rise or any increase in prices of any kind. I'm not familiar with the trade-off in the Ag bill, so I can't really speak to the issue directly. I just remind members, of course, that, and I referred to it briefly in my oral testimony, that the federal debt, you recently had to raise the debt ceiling above $9 trillion. I just remind everybody that it first reached $1 trillion in 1981. It was $5.5 trillion about 7 years ago. So we've added close to $3.5 trillion over the last 7 or 8 years. So we do need to have revenue for the federal government. Nobody likes to pay taxes, and certainly DRAM business is an awful business to try to levy increased taxes on. But we do have to worry about our federal deficit.
So not my area of expertise. I think I'll pass on that question.
Well, I'm an engineer, but as any engineer, I have an opinion on everything. And I think a lot of our members would find that...
Sound like an MD.
Yeah.
Or a lawyer.
Or a lawyer, that's true. I think what I've found is most of our members are now learning the importance of understanding not just technology and how it's applied, but also how, I'll call it the law of unintended consequences, can hit you, that what someone thinks is really a good piece of legislation can actually end up having a negative impact on employment and opportunities for people. So I would say in most cases our members are looking now at the question of working for a foreign country. Insourcing is creating a lot of great opportunities for people, and we may not want to be harming those opportunities because that's really the growth in many cases people are seeing.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gingrey. Ms. Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first two questions are for Mr. Becker. You mentioned in your written testimony and the little bit that I got here today that you've seen a shortage of capable technical workers in the United States, among which the educational levels such as the associate, bachelor's, and master's degree programs. What percentage of your workers hold degrees, 2-year, 4-year, and graduate?
If I look at the manufacturing facility that I have in Richmond, engineering degrees, 4-year degrees, or maybe advanced degrees are probably, do the math in my head quickly, I should be able to do that as an engineer, right? Probably 30, 35, 40%, probably about 35%, 40%. Many of those people, rise into the management ranks. People with associate's degrees typically are those who perform maintenance on our equipment. They also do the day-to-day process sustaining in our factory, deal with SPC, statistical process control, making sure things are performing, the processes are performing like they're supposed to. And high school degrees are required for all of our manufacturing associates or our people who actually run the wafers on the manufacturing floor. As a percentage, manufacturing associates probably make up about half.
And what would you say are the fastest wage growth positions, and does it differ in terms of the location of the facility where the job is performed?
The fastest growing wage, I can quote some wage statistics from the Richmond wafer fab facility. The local area wage average is somewhere around $35,000 plus or minus a year. Changes from year to year. We pay on average about $65,000 at that facility. Obviously, with a more advanced degree or in management, you make more. But the starting salary for a manufacturing associate is on the order of $40,000 because we ask them to be proficient in math and science, be able to deal with computer systems, and to be able to read statistical charts and to be able to make decisions as to how to tweak the equipment so it continues to process the wafers as they should be processed.
Do you have a specific process locally with your colleges about your positions, or do you do outreach, or how do you let people know that these jobs are available?
Well, we obviously advertise for jobs. When we first came to town in Richmond, in Virginia didn't have a semiconductor industry per se. We worked very closely with the community colleges, put in place an associate's degree in microelectronics that was geared towards our needs. We worked very closely with Virginia Commonwealth University as luck would have it. Motorola negotiated a microelectronics center there. They're in our backyard. We do a lot of work with them. We spend a lot of time talking about curriculum development and modifications and changes so that their product, the undergraduate and the graduate student, are tailored to what we need to be successable.
And do you find the community college receptive?
Absolutely. To the point where we've had more than one community college come together and put together joint proposals and joint efforts to try and address that need.
Thank you, sir. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Richardson. Dr. Ehlers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a very interesting hearing. And I'd like to make several comments before asking questions based on the comments I had heard and some that I heard were said before I got here. First of all, let me emphasize, I've spent an immense amount of time on this, first throughout my life, but especially the last 12 years here. And I have spent a lot of my time just trying to improve math and science at the K-12 level. The question is, why K-12? My opinion is that's where the biggest problem is, for a couple of reasons. First of all, if students don't get an adequate math and science education in the elementary and secondary schools, they are not likely to choose engineering or science as a career at the university level simply because they will have a lot of makeup work to do. It'll be at least 5 years, up 6. So I think it's important to give them that base. Secondly, I believe that the jobs of the future, in fact, many of the jobs of the present, require a good understanding of the basic principles. Go into almost any factory today, its world's different from years ago, particularly a machine shop. Years ago, when I'd visit one, you'd see lines of lathes, people standing at the lathes, turning the screws, measuring with micrometers. Today, it's huge milling machines, computer operated. The operators are paid very well, $70,000, $80,000 a year, but they have to understand how to run a complex machine. They are hired as high school graduates. They haven't developed the skills in math and science needed for that job. They simply won't get the job. And I think the jobs of the future are all going to move in that direction, requiring that skill. Even some that are not highly technical. My favorite stories was when I was in the state senate in Michigan. One of the convenience store owners in that area discovered that he was losing about $100,000 cash per year in wrong change. Seems excessively large, but he had a chain, and so it wasn't that much in each shop. But at the same time, and you're all engineers, you know how diodes work. Giving change is a diode. You get it wrong, the money just flows out. If you get it right, I'm sorry, if the error is in the benefit of the customer, the money flows out. If it's the benefit of the store, it doesn't come back. It flows out. Well, I guess most of the consumers in our area are very similar to those in Oregon. So I think it's a safe assumption. At any rate, there are a host of reasons that I have for believing science and math in elementary and secondary schools are important. If nothing else, to be good citizens. In today's world, if you want to try to read the label of contents on something, you better have a little background. Or if you live in California and want to vote with the many environmental propositions they have every year, you better know something about math and science if you're going to vote intelligently. Having said that, what about higher education? There are a lot of engineers being prepared in the world. Last year alone, China graduated more English-speaking engineers than the States. In addition to that, they graduated a considerably larger number who are non-English speaking. These engineers are going to get jobs somewhere. I think it's better to have an oversupply of something like this. Also, I happen to think that people who are trained in science and engineering are very versatile employees in a number of fields. When I received my PhD, one of my brightest colleagues went off to Wall Street for a job. I'm sure he's done much better than I have. But his analytical skills, his mathematical skills that he has developed, very valuable in that profession. Engineering, I think, has particular problems, and Mr. Kostek, I think you zeroed in on those. People have given up, as you said. I have a son who's an electronics engineer, designs flight management computers for aviation, and does a lot of other avionics work. He's adamantly opposed to the H-1B visa program because there are so many unemployed engineers already in this country. But in almost every case, I've checked through that, they're good people. They've done good engineering work in their life, but they never kept up with their field, or for that case, with other fields. And that's the key, and perhaps that's where the distance learning you mentioned, Teitelbaum, is most effective. Some don't want to go back to school, and that may be true, but again, distance learning isn't that. I think, and employers also have a responsibility to help them in that situation. But as you say, they do feel left behind. That's because they have been left behind, and it's partly their fault, perhaps partly their employer's fault, by simply not keeping up with the field. I think everyone in the scientific field has to keep up with the times, or they're soon going to be out of a job. I don't know if we can, how we can bring that through to them, but I sincerely believe that. Now, this, I'm sorry, but I'm the son of a minister, and I always tend to give sermons, but I'd appreciate answers any of you might wish to comments, particularly if you disagree with them.
Well, I guess the only thing I would maybe disagree with when you talked about an oversupply of engineers and scientists can't hurt, the question would be, what do we do with the oversupply? And I grant that people can go into other fields and other areas for employment, but I think the message that may send back to people following them in the pipeline is, well, I'd like to study engineering, but all these people who graduated before me never became engineers, they became other things, so I'm going to go off and study business because that's where this person ended up. So I think the risk we always face is that the oversupply may lead to an undersupply at some point in time as the system responds to what people see around them. In terms of the continuing education, that's something we, constantly talk to our members about, the necessity to upgrade their skills, watch the marketplace, and understand the changes that are taking place in terms of competition, that you may, the history has changed, and so that the time of saying, well, there's a downside right now, but we'll be recovering soon is gone. And now what ends up happening is inexpensive commodity-type components can be replaced and built somewhere else, and so people now have to constantly look at, what am I adding to the business? How am I helping this business to make additional money?
Yes, and I don't disagree with any of that, except I come from a liberal arts background. I happen to think that if you have a good liberal arts background, you are incredibly versatile in the marketplace. And it would be very disappointing for a new engineer to discover he has trouble finding a job in that. But there are many jobs in society that can use those skills that that person has, whether it's math, it's very effective. I mean, I'm a good example of that. A physicist, I did research for 12 years. I ended up here. Now, that may have been a waste of a scientist, but I think I've been able to accomplish something here simply because I am a scientist and the first research physicist ever elected. I would love to see more engineers. It's a pretty lonely world here. Other comments?
Yeah, I think in general nobody's going to argue against more math, science, better education. It's a question of trade-offs. And particular concern is, what are the trade-offs inherent in policies that have been focusing on the K-12 math, particularly with the direction or the orientation of producing more scientists and engineers. And the concerns it would have are that it, in a world run without unlimited dollars, does it assess the trade-off of the top and the bottom? If our great concerns and the great deficits that we find are the bottom 30%, those who can't count change, those who can't do basic math. I've yet to hear an employer say that the professional staff are not skilled, educated enough in math and science. I've yet to hear an employer say their engineers don't have math science skills. I do hear managers complain that their engineering and professional technical staff don't have communication skills, don't have the broad-based education, business, marketing, liberal arts. And so in some ways, the overemphasis on math and science does not create the kinds of scientists and engineers we need, and doesn't direct the resources to those who are most deficient. So that's my concern within the broad-based support of more better education, is that we need to look at what trade-offs are made. And math, science, it is zero-sum to some sense. If you increase the quantity of that, you're decreasing the quantity of something else.
Well, perhaps my point on the K-12 is I think it's valuable for them. My principal goal of having them learn math and science in K-12 is not to have them become scientists and engineers, but to become useful citizens in our. I think that's one can show that that's essential. Now, if they happen to go on to science and engineering, if they can't find a job, there are lots of other jobs that are available with that skill program. I found it well, I taught at a liberal arts college as well as teaching at Berkeley, and I'm convinced that liberal arts education is very good for engineers. When we followed up our engineering graduates, a vastly disproportionate number of them ended up in management because they had picked up the other skills that you mentioned that are needed for management. I think I've gone past my limit, Mr. Chairman.
In a very useful way, Dr. Ehlers.
Unless someone else agrees with me, then we...
We have just been beeped for another set of votes. I think the only humane thing to do is to release the witnesses when we do have to go, but it is my intention to ask questions quickly and so that more members can ask questions if they have them in the 10 or 12 minutes or so that we have left. Back to the nimbleness issue, and anyone who wants to address this, so that students can, if you will, make the right moves between different types of training, and also so that current workers can get the training or prepare for the next move if or when necessary. What market signals can we more effectively send both students and current workers so that they can choose among the available fields for either the first-time education or continuing education? Dr. Teitelbaum?
Well, Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be highly desirable in response to your question if graduate science programs made available to prospective students what the career outcomes of their recent graduates, and if there are postdocs in their programs have been. This is raw material that all prospective students should be able to find easily. How have the chemistry PhDs from the University of X done in their careers in the last few years? And it's sometimes quite difficult to find, particularly in the biomedical sciences. And that would be a basic metric, I would say. We ought to be providing those signals to the smart students who are thinking about what they want to do with their next 5 or 10 years.
Mr. Becker?
I think most progressive companies that are in the science and technology marketplace, if you will, do two things for their existing employees. They provide the opportunity, generally paid for, to go back to school, get an advanced degree, go to seminars, go to certificate classes. I heard an earlier testimony that may be difficult working a full-time job, but I think most employers want their employees to grow. Okay, we've invested up front to get them to a certain point. We want to get them to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. When we talk about technical resources, not management resources, but technical resources, I think most companies that are in those fields have what they call a technical ladder, which allows individuals not to hit a glass ceiling, if you will, because they won't go into management, but to be able to progress in their careers, be compensated as they grow themselves technically and become a much more valuable asset to the company.
Dr. Ehlers, I understand you have a...
just very briefly in response to Dr. Teitelbaum, not to disagree with you, but your example of a PhD in chemistry reminded me that sitting in this room is Julia Jester, who is my aide, PhD in chemistry. I don't think she ever intended to come to the Congress to work, but she got a one-year fellowship at ACS in town. She liked science policy, and she's here and doing an outstanding job. I'd be lost without her. If she had gotten discouraged about looking at the statistics and not getting jobs as chemist, she might not have done it. Thank you very much.
Actually, chemistry does pretty well. I think she would have been encouraged if those data had been available.
Mr. Becker, do you have something to continue with, or does anyone else on the panel have something to say on
I'm done with my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Kostek.
I think the only thing I would add is it's also an interesting time, and several people on this panel heard me say this last week. No one would have thought a few years ago that someone would have created a business called Linden Labs that created something called Second Life, and you now have people making thousands of dollars a year selling virtual products to virtual people online. And so some of the opportunities that we talk about for our members and for our future engineers haven't been identified yet. And it's almost a question of encouraging people to be open to what may sound like an absolutely crazy idea when it's first proposed may turn out to be the ideal solution. And we're not necessarily talking about having special skills or adding new skills. It's more having the openness to say, let's go try this thing. I'm sure the father of the young man who created Facebook, who when he sold $240 million worth of his company to Microsoft last week, was probably still sitting there shaking his head thinking, I can't believe he made a business out of this. So I think there's lots of times when we talk about the skills, it's not just the skills, it's also the openness to take the risk in a vastly, quickly changing marketplace.
Anyone else before we turn to Dr. Gingrey? Dr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Picking up on what Dr. Ehlers said, I want to recognize also Dr. Dan Deckler, who is my fellow. Raise your hand, Dan. Dan is a PhD electrical engineer. I think his basic undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering, and I'm very fortunate that he's with the committee as a fellow for a year. But you know, this whole issue of the thinking, and Dr. Teitelbaum, you mentioned, I think you made a statement that in regard to engineers, we can offer no assurance that they will find a durable and resilient career path in such fields. Compared with other career paths, the question is a career in science and engineering more or less likely to guarantee a high-paying job? In what I've noticed, I was on the school board when I was first starting in politics, local high school board, and you know, it seems like a lot of my children's contemporaries, when they went off to college, they wanted to be broadcast journalists. They wanted to be the next Laurie Dew or Tony Snow, or they wanted, some of them with athletic ability, you know, hope that they would be the next, I forget the coach's name in Alabama that's making $4 million a year. But, you know, I think if there was some way we could educate young people in regard to when the economy's good, and it mostly is, that an engineering career is not a bad life and not a bad income. And I think a lot of our young people get a false sense of celebrities, I guess because of our pop culture and television and that sort of thing. And they thinking, well, engineering, you know, I kind of like that. I like math, I like science, I like chemistry, I like physics, but you know, what are my chances of ending up making as much as a member of the United States Congress? Well, I would say darn good. All they have to do is make about $150,000 a year, and they're there. But I really do believe that a lot of young people think that, you know, it's just not glamorous enough. But here you, 5 of you, are testifying before Congress. That's pretty good. And your communication skills are good. And I think maybe Dr. Ehlers or somebody else mentioned the importance of developing these other skills other than just having a great brain for science and technology. So I don't know, maybe you want to comment on that a little bit. We do, Dr. Ehlers, I guess, had to step out, maybe went to vote, but we just need to incentivize our young people in some way and get them turned on to this excitement of STEM education.
Congressman, I couldn't agree more with that, and the only caveat I would add is that erratic boom-bust kinds of occupations are not the kinds of things you want to see if a lot of preparation and study is required to enter the occupation or the profession. So booms and busts and oscillations with big hiring booms and then 5 or 7 years later, big layoffs. Send messages that you don't want to see sent, which are cover stories in major magazines during the last Silicon Valley bust, saying things like "finished at 40?" and showing an electrical engineer or an IT professional. That's not a good sequence for occupations that really do require a lot of talent, a lot of hard work, and a lot of years to prepare for and to become proficient in. So you want to not see these booms and busts. That's why I mentioned in my testimony that we do have a tendency in our funding to incentivize, to encourage booms and busts in these sectors, which are not healthy for the long-term enterprise.
There may be a misperception about lack of interest. I mean, when you look at the amount of math, science taking, the majors students are entering, we don't see any drop-off, but in fact, a gradual, a constant or slight increase in the rate and percent of students that do elect for science and engineering majors in college. So there is not a great evidence of decline of interest. And the extent that it does vary, as Michael Teitelbaum pointed out, does seem to go with the employment cycle. So.
And just last comment about engineers in general. Sure, part of the education process to become an engineer is technical in nature, but another part of an engineer's education is how to solve problems, how to attack problems, how to logically work your way through those things. And I don't know if you want to see a show of hands how many people in here have engineering degrees, but I personally believe that the skill that allows you to solve problems is transferable to almost anything you want to do.
Yeah, I will just kind of conclude. I know my time's expired and we do have a vote, but as I watch my children go through middle school and even into high school, but especially in middle school, they would have homework and they would have to do the rote kind of stuff, but at the end there was always the word problems, which were the most exciting, how you apply what you learned and problem solving, as you're talking about, Mr. Becker. And they would say, well, the teacher said, we don't have to do those. That's just optional. When really, to me, it was the most important thing to work those word problems so that you are become a problem solver. Thank you.
Mr. Becker, working for the organization that you do, you may have more knowledge of how Germany or Europe may do things differently than we do here in the United States, and I would welcome comments from the rest of the panel also. How does your company and how does Germany differ from, say, mainstream American practices or laws in sending signals to workers about what to prepare for, or what happens if there are layoffs? Again, this is trying to get at the nimbleness issue of when organizations move. How do you help people? What's the best way to have people adjust to the organizational moves?
It would be hard for me to characterize the German workforce as a nimble workforce. I think it's one that's managed heavily and legally bound to the union process. There's heavy negotiations between companies and representatives for workers and workers' councils, and where we have boards of directors that govern our publicly held companies. They also have boards of directors that are 50% made up of representatives that represent the employees.
My apologies. If any of the other panelists have a comment on this question, I will take your answer in writing. The clock is at 0, but there are still about 150 members who haven't voted. But I think that there may be a couple of further inquiries which we will send your way in writing I am now going to bring the hearing to a close and thank our witnesses for testifying and for your forbearance in this broken up set of sessions here, and the record will remain open for additional statements from members and for questions and answers that any committee members may ask. The witnesses are now excused and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much.